Oh, that's great. Okay, my name is Lex. I'm going to talk about ExtractCompare, and which is software for pre-screening of photos and detecting likely matches for display and visual confirmation. I'm going to show a few examples of where it's been applied, how it works, and then talk about more generally about what sort of stuff you can get out of Photo ID and the problem of when the software misses potential matches. What can you do about it? And, it's old, the software. It was built about 22 years ago with Phil Lovell at the Sea Mammal Research Unit for Photo ID of grey seals, and has been applied since then to lots of species, some of which are currently being used, others not. Before I go on further, I'd like to thank the organisers for inviting me, putting up with my erratic timing, because I now work on my own doing this, and so I'm very isolated, and so this is a chance for me to find out what everybody else has been doing. I'm not sure why I'm first up, because I'm not in the mainstream of Photo ID, and I'm certainly not at the cutting edge. As I say, I'm isolated, so I don't know who is, but one person who I'm very impressed with is Thilo Berghardt from Bristol University. His software is amazing, and one should look at what he's been doing. So ExtractCompare is making a 3D model of the species you're interested in and superimposing it on each new photo so that you can scan a consistent region consistent with respect to camera angle. So this example is application for southern right whale. The pattern is the callosity pattern on the head. The model is made by photogrammetry from underwater pictures and is applied to each new photo in order to scan this callosity pattern consistently. Maybe easier to demonstrate using this spot pattern on a whale shark. Again, we have a photogrammetry generated model which fits itself to each new photo, and then we scan from a defined area defined by the model. So for instance, lying between this, oh my God, between this line of longitude and this line of longitude, and from this ring maybe up to this ring. And you see, because the camera angle is oblique from behind, the scan is taken from a rectangle of model coordinates, not a rectangle of screen coordinates. So for example, as a result of that, the scan lines are curved here, okay, because we're looking at the animal from the back and allowing for its three-dimensional shape. So the idea, of course, is that you then get a standard scan of its spot pattern, which will look the same next time, even when you see it maybe obliquely from the front or from the top. You'll get a similar or very consistent scan of the pattern. So back to grey seals, which was why we made this in the first place. And this is a female grey seal at a breeding beach photographed, and then a dead seal on the same beach a few weeks later. And these photos matched. And this is showing this as an extreme example of my approach, which was not to use feature vectors, because because a lot of these images I didn't think we could reliably describe significant features, and instead of that, the algorithms that go on to compare the pattern use the distribution of the light intensity right across this region. So that was the importance of having that region be consistent, having the same limits and the same shape irrespective of the camera angle. So this is a matching pair of photos, and you know, it's quite hard to even see that they are the same, but in fact they are, and the algorithm picks it out because of the distribution of the intensity of the grey shade intensity being the same for the two. How it works, I'm going to show that using tiger photos. ExtractCompare is used to manage the two large camera trap databases in India, but sometimes you get pictures, handheld pictures like this, and it uses the stripe pattern on the flank, and so the job here is to extract the flank stripe pattern, and the process is to drag onto the image these yellow dots which represent special points, such as, for instance, just behind the foreleg, the hip, the top of the shoulder and the tail. And then you click on this initial fit button and it superimposes this model of the body of the tiger, superimposes it by scaling, rotating and translating it so that the distances between where you put those special points and where the projection of those special points is, the model projection of those special points, it's minimizing these distances. So that's the initial attempt to superimpose the model on the tiger. And then when you click fit here, the model starts to bend and twist in order to fit itself to the photo. Now, not only trying to minimize those distances, but also trying to minimize the discrepancy between where you marked the limits of the body. If I go back, you mark the limits, I forgot to say, you need to mark the limits of the upper and lower limit. So by the time it's bending and twisting, it's also minimizing the discrepancy between the projection, model projection of those edges and where you mark the edges. So when you're satisfied with that, you click extract, and it scans, as I say, it scans in a rectangle of model coordinates, and as a result gets a sort of flat display of the of the stripe pattern. And in this region here, which is grey, this instructs the comparison algorithm to ignore this area because that corresponds to this area here, which is too oblique. The camera angle is just skating across the body at that point. And when you then click OK, it goes on to mark the line ends and bifurcations using red circles where the line ends upwards and blue circles where it ends downwards. And then when you press place seeds, it selects triples of those endings and bifurcations in different regions, and each of those triples initiates the comparison algorithm when you click Save Extract. So this process takes a couple of minutes, the putting of the points on and clicking these various buttons, but you only do it once, right? For each new photo of a tiger, you do it once, and that's it. You don't have to repeat that. When you click OK, it goes ahead and compares this newly extracted pattern with all the ones that are in the memory of the computer, and comes up with the highest scoring existing animal as a potential match to this new photograph. So it's then up to you to confirm that yes, it either does match or it doesn't. And if it does, you click match, And this program is integrated with the database. So when you click match, it then updates the ID, the current name of this new photo, to the existing name. So that guy is now matched to him. And then at the same time, it shows you the next highest scoring library animal. And again, you look at the stripe patterns, and if it's not the same, you see that the score is much lower. It's gone from 1 down to 0.07. And so you reject that and stop the checks, and you've finished with that comparison. Any questions, please? Anything not clear? I was going to show this in real time on the computer, and I would have had 30 seconds while it was searching. It's got about 550 IDs in there. It would have taken 30 seconds, so I planned anybody had a burning question that would happen now. But okay, 30 seconds have gone, so everybody understands. That's great. Right. So that's ExtractCompare. It's old. It's legacy software. It's used for lots of species. Works very well on some, not that well on others. But generally, why do we do photo ID? And I'm just putting this section in because, of course, we get the money for monitoring the abundance of the population, for estimating survival. Statistically complicated things. But while we're doing that, I'm making a plea for looking for interesting stuff along the way. So, for example, in the case of the tigers, we have this forensic application that when we get a seized skin, we take a photo of the skin and match that to the catalogue so that we can find out where that animal came from. Anthropogenic effects, threats to the population from pollution, disturbance, and so on. Get a lot of these net entanglement pictures, which are all logged, and because it's photo ID, you can see what the fate of these individuals is. Do you ever get to see them again? Do they survive or not? You see, you can log things that you can notice when you're taking the pictures, like wounds and blindness and so on. And sometimes you get a little story developing. So here we have a grey seal photographed in Wales, looking fine. 2 years later in Ireland, and now either blind or going blind in both eyes. And 2 months later back in Wales, completely blind, and yet having moved from Ireland to Wales and hauled out on a rocky shore in a big wild sea. So it's interesting to me, you know, what does that suggest maybe about associations? How does she do that? Does she use sounds of other seals around? And I also wonder about the blindness. Why blind in both eyes simultaneously? Is this shotgun wounds? I'm trying to think why you would go blind. Normally you would have a trauma and you know, anyway, so interesting things might occur. This is a slide we photographed at three widely separated grey seal haul-outs on the east coast of the UK and Scotland, and I was interested to see this. We did it over 6 years, so you've got intervals from 1 year to 5 years, and if you look at the 1 year interval, you can see what the transitions were over 1 year from each of the 3 sites to each of the others. And you can generate a little transition matrix saying that 92% were seen back at the same, and 4% were seen moving from site 1 to site 2, and so on. So having made your transition matrix, what you might then think is, okay, I'll take that to higher powers to predict what I expect the transitions to be over longer intervals. So over 5 years, my transition matrix would be the one that I constructed from the 1 year interval to the power 5. If you do that and you look at what the predicted percentage that that are resighted at the same site as they were last time, that percentage will drop. The animals will drift gradually away from their initial site. But the data doesn't show that. The data shows that the percentage that are resighted at the same site doesn't drop as the interval increases. Even after 5 years, we still have almost all of them seen at the same site, which tells me that this assumption, this Markov assumption, that all you need to do is to assume that where a seal next goes depends only on where she currently is, leads to this result. But in fact, clearly these seals have preferences for certain places which stay forever. You know, they have homes. It's not Markovian. And I mean, that's completely obvious to most people, including biologists, but a lot of mathematical models of movement use this Markov assumption. So I think that's an interesting result of the photo ID. Okay, but now, you know, you have to estimate abundance and survival from this data. And you could go to Program Mark, and there's lots of models you can use. But you have this problem, okay, the false rejection rate. What if your software doesn't guarantee to bring out the likely match, the potential matches for you to then check and confirm? So that software by Thilo that I mentioned, Thilo Berghardt, applied to African penguins, is fantastic. In real time, it identifies the matches and never misses any. That's great. But if you do miss, then you're in a world of pain. And I wanted to emphasize that by saying, look, in that situation, the encounter history, which is the sort of holy grail, isn't even sufficient for abundance estimation. And this is an example from years ago. Phil and I were asked to analyze some data on Javan rhino, photo ID data, to come up with the minimum population size. And it was important because there was a move to capture the world remaining population and ship them over to the USA for captive breeding. And it depended on whether there were more or less than 25 left in the world. And we realized that in order to come up with the minimum, the largest lower bound on the population size, it's not enough just to record the photos that match and record the photos that are showing new individuals, because you can see they're different to everybody. You also need to retain all the photos and record, okay, if they're not different from all the previous ones, which ones are they different from? So you can generate this diagonal matrix showing that this individual, come down in here, this individual wasn't for sure different from all the previous ones, but it was definitely different from these two and different from these. So that you can end up writing an algorithm that looks for the maximum number of definitely different from each other, okay? So it's not just encounter histories, and so it's a really serious problem. And you need to address it and think what to do about it. Well, you know, you can visually check everything so that you're not depending on the database on the software to bring up the likely matches. And that's not as silly as it sounds, because by the time you have the majority of your population in your database, then the matches, they will normally be found immediately by the software, and it's only sometimes that you have to go and look all the way through to check that you haven't missed a match. So you can visually check. You can take extra photos and retain them. Don't throw them away. Don't just hang on to the one best photo of each individual. Deliberately keep 2 or 3, because that reduces the rejection rate, the false rejection rate, very rapidly. So as an experiment here, we looked at the false rejection rate for grey seals identified only by the flank pattern and retaining all the really lousy pictures, so that we had a really bad rejection rate of I think 46%. Only 54% were matched when we just had one new picture and one old picture. But when we started to group them up and had, for instance, 2 old pictures and 2 new, so you now have 4 comparisons, the false rejection rate has become very small, and by the time you have 5 or more, it's 0. So with photo ID, if you keep more pictures and give the software the potential to compare not just 1 with 1, but 2 with 2, or 2 with 3, or whatever, you can reduce the false rejection rate. Of course, you may not have more pictures. You may only have 1, so that's also not a final solution. Instead of extra photos, you can use more than one region of the body. Use the side of the head, the neck, the flank, the dorsal, the ventral regions. And you can use more than one comparison algorithm so that you get a multiplicity of scores. And those then can be used to identify the likely matches. You do then have to standardize those scores so that they can all be considered in the same way. But that's not difficult, because you can use this Bayesian posterior probability that the 2 photos are a match, given what the score was. So this S here is the score, say, for the photo of the neck using algorithm number 1. And you can look at the distribution of those scores for non-match pairs, and you can look at the distribution of those scores for match pairs. You need a test set, and then that ratio here gives us a standardized score, so that now you can consider the score that you got from the neck using algorithm number 1 at the same time as the score that you got from the flank using algorithm number 2. They can all be piled together, and you can extract the highest one and use that to show the likely match. I know I'm galloping through this, but I can explain this again. Yeah, what people say is, oh, it's no problem, you just use only the best images. But it is a problem for lots of reasons. For one thing, if the species is rare, they don't want you to be throwing pictures away. They want you to use every picture in case, that's an important bit of data. Quality assessment is subjective. You might come up with objective measures, fuzziness and, I don't know, various things. Whether there's reeds in front of the picture and all that. Actually, that our experience is that they don't work at all well. Your best assessment is still subjective. Is this a decent picture or not? But that suffers from confounding potentially the quality of the image and the quality of the pattern. It's no problem to throw a picture away if the image is lousy, but once you start throwing pictures away because the pattern isn't so great, obviously you're then biasing towards that section of the population that has the nice patterns, and you're no longer estimating the size of the population as a whole. The other thing to consider is that even if you're thinking, is this a good or a bad picture? Well, it depends, because photo ID is a question of comparing pictures in pairs. So you may say, well, this is not a very good image because it's, very oblique, say, from the front. But then if your library picture happened to be oblique also from that similar angle, then actually this is a good picture. It's difficult to assess what you mean by a good and a bad picture in isolation, picture by picture. You really need to do that pairwise. So that's difficult. So we came up with the idea, okay, let's measure it. Let's measure the false rejection rate for whatever body region and algorithms we have available. And having measured it, can we allow for it then in our population modeling? And you can. If you consider a typical encounter history of zeros and ones representing didn't encounter it, did encounter it, didn't encounter it, and so on, that particular history can be generated as a result of, well, in order for that to be generated in the presence of this false rejection rate, what has to happen is that the seal has to be there and be photographed on those samples with the ones, and then those all have to be matched together. And then in the samples with the zeros, where it wasn't seen, the seal was either, or the animal was either not photographed, or it was photographed but it wasn't matched as a function of the number of other photos. So you can calculate that, and you can come up with a likelihood for the observed encounter history frequencies given a measured or estimated false rejection rate. So we did that using data, Paddy's data from North Rona, and in fact also brought in left, right and both side identifications by replacing the ones with L, R or B to represent an encounter only from the left, only from the right or from both sides. You can build that in as well. And it does work, but having written it, it's very complicated, and the problem with a thing like this is that it falls outside of the general framework that a program like Mark provides. If you've got data and you process it through Mark, you know, everybody understands what you've done, and you have the reassurance of having used tested software. If you go ahead and try and do this, you're out on a limb. So it's an unsolved problem, I think, and I just want to conclude by saying that there are a few papers out there that say, oh, you